Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I'm here for my LPL week number 3 overview and analysis video. This one's gonna be a little bit different. You're probably used to the long videos coming in from me for the LPL, the hour and a half, 45-minute videos every single week because we have a bunch of series to cover. 17, typically, 19 sometimes, 22 sometimes. There's a lot of series to cover in the LPL for the most part in most weeks, but we are going into Chinese New Year, which means we're actually getting, a little bit less around this time. In week 3, we're only going to be covering 6 series, so this video is going to be a lot shorter, one of the shortest that I'm going to do all week long in any of the regions, and also we don't have any LPL next week. There is going to be nothing to cover, and so, the LPL is going to be on a little bit of a hiatus, but we still have these couple series, these 6 series to go over from week number 3 before we jump into the Chinese New Year break. So let's get into it. I'm excited. I hope you guys are as well. Let me know down in the comment section below what you thought of the small sample size that we got this week overall. I know it's not the most information possible, but we still got a pretty good idea of where these teams are at, even after the, limited amount of games that they were able to play. So let me know what you thought of all of them down in the comment section below. Where do you think everybody is going into the Chinese New Year? Just would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on anything LPL related. Of course, if you are new here, what we do on this channel is go series by series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each individual series that we cover. At the end of the week, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to kind of tie everything into a nice, neat little bow, and I will also be updating my power rankings with where I personally would put these teams from number 1 to number 17 in the LPL. So without further ado, let's jump into day number 1, and we kick day 1 off with a pretty interesting series here between Team WE and LGD Gaming, two teams that surprisingly are at 500 for very different reasons, but WE is going to be able to pull out the win here, as they probably should be able to do against an LGD team that quite frankly they should just be better than, and they were luckily in this one, but it was pretty close. LGD picking up a game in game 2. They continue to overperform, and some of these players continue to look very good individually. The problem is that you just have a bit of inconsistency at some critical roles, and there's one position in particular that's been a huge hindrance for LGD over the course of this split, that of course being AD carry. And then for WE, this team's good. I don't know if they're great. They only really have one player on their team right now who's playing great. A lot of the problems that they had last week and the week before, they've carried in to this series, to week number 3 here. They really haven't changed my opinion about them all that much, and that is a bit concerning. But at the very least, they do have a couple of players that are playing out of their minds right now, and one of them, he's in the top lane, baby. It's Wayward, who's going to get my player of the series. I don't want to pat myself on the back too much. I say that, but I do kind of want to pat myself on the back for this one because the doomer talk around Wayward has been very loud over the past couple of years, going back to 2022, even, last year on 2023 when he was benched by Qingtian, and, he came back in and played some pivotal minutes for the team, pivotal games for the team down the stretch. They couldn't make Worlds, and I think a lot of people were looking at Wayward as this awful player, one who wasn't even a top 10-ish top laner in the LPL, and I had always pushed back on that conversation so much. In fact, my regulars got very annoyed by it in the comment section when you look at them last year or the year before. I had been very, very pro Wayward for a while. What I always said was that he's a good player who is asked to play a big role on a great team, and he has more good games than bad games, but the bad games stand out a lot because he has to play with Tian, and he has to play with Jackie Love, and he has to play with Rookie, and he has to play with all of these super great players that are, being pretty good for the team, and so he was always kind of the scapegoat. LPL fans love you guys, but you love your scapegoats, especially the ones on Reddit. And Wayward ended up being that, I think, for top esports for many years. He gets to go to a better situation here on WE, and he has been phenomenal. Truly an MVP favorite right now. Maybe not like number 1, but he's definitely in the top 3 in the LPL for how he has played so far. He has genuinely destroyed everybody that he's gone up against. He's gotten significantly more resources here on WE, but his individual mechanics in one-on-one matchups have gotten greatly improved. I think the confidence, just the weight off of his back, where he's not just this target game after game after game of everybody's ridicule in the top lane. It's allowed him to be a little bit freer. His team fighting is exceptional, truly, like top of the line level team fighting from what he offers. He's so aggressive. He sets up the rest of his team. And even though he sometimes dies early on in fights, often he single-handedly wins them with some of the engages he makes. He's just a really good player. Bertle has actually had a pretty decent split up until this point on LGD. He's been a good player for a little while. I know, again, it doesn't seem like it. He's kind of been in the Wayward position before, except he was on Damwon. But Wayward made him look completely like nothing in this series. He was amazing. He's just dominated everybody he's gone up against. He is the best player on WE, and it's not particularly close. He has been the best top laner in the LPL to start this year, and that is certainly not a sentence even I, his biggest defender, would have expected to say. Prince had a very good series here. I really needed to see this. I was talking in previous weeks about how it felt like he hadn't been aggressive enough, about how his style of dominating isolated in the 2v2 didn't really translate to the LPL so far. Some people were saying that could have been a Wandy. I just wanted to see Prince kind of take destiny into his own hands a little bit more, try to win the game with the talent that we know he has, and he did that a lot more in this series. The aggression was a bit more active in the early game. The Kalista was really trying to push the tempo in game number 3, and Prince wanted to match that, and I think that definitely was a positive. Wandy was also pretty good too, but I think a lot of the positives in the bot lane did come from Prince, in my opinion. Fofo's been really good this year, so, him having, I don't want to say an off series, but one where he was probably the second best mid. I can live with that. He wasn't a disaster. And Hang is still concerning to me. I mean, we were really looking for the sophomore breakout from him, and it has not happened. He has not been particularly good in year 2 so far. That carried over into the series. He also was probably worse than his counterpart on the other side of this matchup. If he's not better, that really kind of limits the upside for what WE can offer, even with Wayward and Fofo playing really well, with Prince and Awandi seemingly starting to figure out how they might want to play a little bit more aggressive in the bot lane. Like, these are all positive signs, but jungle is something that is going to need to get better from what it is right now for this team to be able to compete, but at the very least, it's really nice to see them be able to win a series like this. LGD, for as much as I clown on them, and for as much as they are overachieving, they have been playing really well this year. They have a couple of players who are actually on fire right now. To see WE come out and just be able to beat them is still a good sign. And then for LGD on the other side, he gave you your best shot here. Meteor and Haichao are genuinely very good right now. Haichao was playing awesome. I had kind of given up on him. I know that there were people that were talking in the preseason about the hype for him and, oh, he's still this young player that has a lot of upside. That's how we felt about him 2 years ago. But then it was year after year of underperformance. And, you're talking about potential. Yes, he was surrounded by bad teams, but, he never really showed the individual qualities that made me feel like he could perform at this level. But this is the year where it feels like it's all clicked. He was really good in this series. Won game 2 from them with a couple of really good Azir plays. Same thing with Meteor. You could argue he was better in game 2 on the Lilia. He just continues to be a big facilitator for this team, although I do find him a lot better on carries, and I think that's really kind of been the thing for LGD. He's gotten a bit better on engagers since his time on Bilibili for many years ago, but he still is definitely a carry player. Wants the Lilia, wants the Graves, wants the Kindred, wants things of that nature that he can take over and be a damage factor in team fights, but unfortunately the rest of the team is just not there. Jin Zhao's actually been fine, but Bertle was a disaster in this series. Wayward outplayed him at every single turn. Games 1 and 3 were disastrous from the LGD top laner. He has series like this every once in a while. I don't want this to take away from the fact that he's actually been pretty good up until this point, this split. He is a big reason why they are 2-2, but he's a very volatile player. When he loses very hard. It's why his stock has fallen in the last couple of years, and this was an example of that. And then this AD carry spot. It's just a disaster. Xiaoya came in this series. He played over Kepler. Kepler's been arguably the single worst player in the LPL, and Xiaoya came in and was not better, like certainly not good in this series, was also awful on the Ezreal in game 1, got completely outplayed in game number 3 by Prince, who just manhandled him in that bot lane matchup. It's an area of concern. LGD is overperforming, and this team looks a lot better than I would have anticipated because topside looks strong, outside of this series for Bertle, and Meteor and Haichao are playing really well, but if this bot lane is this bad, like bottom 1 bad, if Xiaoya is the worst player in the LPL, or if Kepler is in and he's the worst player in the LPL, it's just going to permanently limit what this team is going to be able to do. They look interesting, but it just feels like they're never going to be able to put it together because their weak links are just a little bit too weak at the moment. But again, for WE, it's a nice win. It keeps them in a pretty good space. They're above 500 in terms of their series and game score. A good place to be. This hasn't felt like a dominant team, but I guess we didn't expect them to be dominant. This feels like a good playoff team. And in the LPL right now, where it doesn't feel like we have 10 of those, that's a pretty good place to be for WE. And then moving on to our second series of day number 1 here, a battle of teams that are, doing all right. Maybe not playoff teams, but okay teams. Ultra Prime taking on Anyone's Legend, and Anyone's Legend is going to pick up the win. Not a huge shock there, but for Ultra Prime to even be considered in the list of teams that's, doing all right, not the worst in the league, that's an accomplishment. They were able to pick up another win, this time in game number 1. That's their 4th of the year. Not bad for a team that everybody unanimously put at number 17, including me, to start the year. Certainly could have been worse for them, but for AL on the other side of this, they're a pretty good team. I still don't feel super sold on them. Their holes are just kind of there. I think that they have some players that just aren't playing as well as maybe you would like at the current moment, but they're able to step up and beat teams that aren't perfect like Ultra Prime is. They're able to capitalize on some mistakes that other teams make. It makes them interesting in terms of, could they potentially make the playoffs? I certainly think it's on the table, but, you know, we'll talk about it now. Player of the series for me, kind of difficult, but I'm going to give it to Kale in the support position. You know, Kale's a big fan favorite of mine. Somebody who I've been considering a channel darling for a little while now, going back to 2022, when he really broke out for Sandbox. I was really on, like, the Kale train back in the day. Him and Prince, I thought, were a great bot lane together, and, you know, I was really sad to see him underperform so much last year when things kind of got rough for Sandbox down the stretch. Him and Teddy did not have any sort of chemistry at all. I had very high hopes for him coming over here to the LPL. It feels like a league that fits his playstyle a lot better. He is very active. He wants to fight. He's a great team fighter. Somebody who's very willing to move around the map and be a little bit more chaotic. He likes laning isolated in the 2v2 as well. Very good laner. Just a lot of things that I think are generally positive. This team hasn't really put a lot of resources into the bot lane. Hope is kind of your quintessential weak side bot lane player. That's what he was for WE. It's what he was for LGD Gaming. It's kind of just what he has been around the block, and so Kale hasn't necessarily gotten a lot of the, you know, the tools that you maybe would want to see from him to potentially break out as one of the more interesting supports in the world, but he's still been pretty good, and he was very good on the Tom Kench. I think he was a big reason why they won game number 2, and he was the reason why they won game number 3, and so really a lot of good takeaways, very good series from him. Hope, I think, also was great, but Shanks is the other player that you really want to shout out here. Nice to see him have a good series. He's not been nearly as good as he was on WE, in my opinion. So far on AL, he's just kind of been a guy on this team. I still think he has the upside. The Corki game very much showed that in game 2, but I want to see the killer instinct that he showed a lot of times. One of the big reasons why I was a big fan of his on WE was because it felt like he was really ready to go in and fight and push his team forward in basically any situation, any circumstance. He was going to be a net positive for his team because he's incredibly mechanically talented, and he's always going to be, at the very least, willing to put himself in the right spot. It's just been a little more controlled, and I think generally that's kind of AL. This team has been kind of slow in terms of how they wanted to play the game, and it's just not necessarily what I want to see from them. I want to see Krako getting more involved. I want to see Shanks getting more involved. I want to see Kale getting more involved. I think a problem is that Harry really has not developed a whole ton here for AL. Not going to say that was a good take of mine just yet because it's super early on into the split, but I have been a bit lower on Harry. I certainly was last year. I think the thing with Harry is that he's a really good laner, and he just doesn't really know what to do after that. He's really bad in team fights, and that is not improved really at all. Going into 2024, I think a lot of people were just hoping that that was going to get better. One of the reasons I had pushed back on that idea, and one of the reasons I ranked Harry so low in my top lane rankings, was because historically speaking, that's something that doesn't always get better for players, basically at any position. Team fighting is something that you usually learn pretty quick into your pro career, and it's not really something that develops as strongly as like survivability in lane per se. Usually you would think it would be the other way around. Lane mechanics are something you could teach, or that you can't teach. You know, it's kind of just being better than the opponent, whereas, you know, team fight positioning, like, you can get better at. It's not necessarily been that way, especially in the LPL, so I'm interested to see if Harry can figure things out. It just has felt kind of like it was last year, maybe a little bit worse, and I think that that's a little bit disappointing for people, but generally AL is a fine team, a little bit of a slow team, not a particularly like exciting team to watch, but they're winning games. They're above 500, and you know, that's pretty good. They're not in the worst space in the entire world, and with how bad the bottom of the playoffs is in the LPL, it's certainly realistic that you could talk about them as a potential playoff team. But for Ultra Prime, again, they're overperforming in the sense that they're winning games because everybody kind of expected this team to be awful, me included, but they're really not good. Uakai is showing a lot of the interesting things that he showed on Invictus, going back to things like the Akali in the one game where Ultra Prime really felt like they were connected and knew how to play through their main player, but everything outside of that was just not particularly good from the rest of the team. Uakai looked okay. Doggo had some moments where he looked all right, but his support was awful. I mean, Jue, a player that I really like, honestly, probably the second best player on this team over the course of this split so far. He was awful, like truly miserable in this series. I don't really know what it was. I don't know if he just had one of those series or, you know, if he's just inconsistent, but, you know, I loved his tape. I thought it was really good that he was getting a shot in the LPL. I was frustrated that it was on Ultra Prime because this is certainly not the organization to bring out the best in him, but he showed a lot of really negative tendencies in this series, and, you know, you just gotta kind of hope that that's not going to rear its head again. I think you want to see more out of your carries. Like, Uakai and Doggo were fine, but they weren't great. Uakai had some good moments again on the Akali in game 1, but certainly you don't want to put him on Karma. I mean, this guy is the one winning you games. You don't want to take the, you know, creativity and the agency out of him. You want to give him the ability to be the one that you can play through and be the focal point instead of using him to make the focal point somebody somebody else, like Doggo, like Hacker, in terms of the comp in game number 3. I just don't really like the draft for Ultra Prime. As much as I do love Enchanters in the mid lane, I think they're ridiculously strong. I just don't think it works for how Ultra Prime probably wants to play the game, and I think it really did put some pressure on the other players. But Jue absolutely has to be better than this. Decade continues to be literally nothing on the top side. Hacker is the definition of like the 15th best jungler in the LPL, where he's not like solo losing games, but he's really not helping you win games. He's just kind of there. And Yuika is an interesting player. Again, I think in a different situation with a different organization, a different surrounding cast, maybe we're talking about him in a different way as this potential, mid lane prospect moving forward, but it's just hard to get excited about him because nothing's going to happen on this team. He's going to drag them to a couple of wins. It really does feel like they are better than the absolute worst, like the bottom 2 teams in the league, but not by much. Even if Doggo plays well, like he did in a series like this, maybe for the first time all year, they still can't pick up a series win. It's not great. Like, Ultra Prime's not a great team. They're a little bit better than we anticipated, but it's not like by a ton. And then for AL, like I said, this team's just not particularly exciting in their current form. They don't play games very actively. They kind of just take advantage of the mistakes and weaknesses that the other teams make, and I don't think that's going to be super successful against teams that are just better than you, which is half the league, in my opinion. And so while I do think there is an opportunity for them to be relevant and to be a playoff team, I think they actually need to change how they play. They're too slow in their current iteration, in my opinion. I think that there is a lot that they can do to fix this, but, it's still good to pick up a win like this. I'm never going to be critical of a team that's winning a series like this. And then moving on to day number 2 here in week 3, and day 2 kicked off with a matchup between teams with a combined 1 series win between both of them. It was LGD Gaming taking on FunPlus Phoenix. And FPX does pick up the win here, their second series win of the year. EDG drops to 0-5 in series score, still winless in terms of best of 3s across all of 2024. It's been an absolute disaster for one of the most historic organizations, not only in the LPL, but in the entire world. An international champion, a world's champion, an MSI champion. It's just not happening. This team is not good on any front. All of the players are playing bad at times. There are changes being made. There are good moments, but they're quickly drowned out by the even worse moments that are happening somewhere else. And even when things seem like they're going right somewhere on the map, it goes wrong somewhere else. And then in the next series, that part of the map that was strong all of a sudden falls apart. This is not a good League of Legends team, and I honestly can't even identify where it's all going wrong. Like, I can make educated guesses. I think some players have been playing weird styles, and I certainly don't think stylistically any of these players play well together, but even I couldn't have predicted it being this bad. FPX, to their credit, I think are a relatively okay team. I think that they have some interesting pieces here. I think jungle has been a pretty decent positive for them, and while the solo lanes aren't exactly killing it at the current moment, I think there's enough to be excited about here, mostly because my player of the series in this one is going to go to Life in the support position. Who knew? The secret to getting Life back on track after what was a horrendous 2023 and really not a great 2024 start in the first 2 weeks was just letting him play Rumble. Like, who knew that was going to be the solution here? But Rumble support, yeah, it worked out pretty well for him. He was amazing in game 1. The pressure that put on in lane was really unanswerable by either the Snake or Vampire. Arguably the worst bot lane in the LPL right now, but, outside of that, like, it still worked. Like, you still have to win with it, and Life definitely did that, and I thought his Karma in game number 3 was also incredibly important towards being able to win that. Karma's just so strong in the meta. I'm really excited to see teams kind of figuring that out. North America found that out, I think, earlier than a lot of other people. I'm not saying that they were inventors of it or anything, but I think it working so much there, both in Tier 1 and in Tier 2, has kind of given some teams a license to think about it more, I think, in other regions. And Karma, I think, will generally continue to rise in terms of play rate because this champion is just in a really strong state right now. But Life made it look like that in this series. Just generally really good stuff, and it's nice to see Life get back on track. Dectum obviously had a good series as well. Life was creating basically everything that FPX had across this whole series. The Rumble was obviously massive and the Karma was massive, but you still needed somebody to be able to follow up with damage. That was Dectum. I want to give a big shout out to Milky Way in the jungle. He's been very good for this team. I was really high on Milky Way's LDL tape. I was really excited to see what he could potentially do here at the LPL level. Wasn't sure if he was going to play. Moyem was kind of set to be the starter here, but ever since they, fully went to Milky Way towards the back half of week number 1, He's clearly been the answer. He's actually very good in the jungle role. I'm not going to say he's like a star right now or anything like that, but he's somebody that I'm definitely keeping an eye on in the future for somebody that could be like an upper tier jungler. He has all the tools. He's very good at engagers, definitely knows when to take a backseat, is very good at facilitating his lanes, and likes playing towards bot lane, which is generally a good thing in the LPL in particular. And so definitely something to watch. I want to see more out of Care. I think that's really the one thing with FPX that I've kind of been a little bit, not frustrated by, but a little bit let down by, is I think Care is the one player that I would have expected to see more out of if this team was going to be interesting. Care was the player I was looking at as the potential star of this team, and it's just not really happened in 2024. He's kind of just been there. Zhao Lahu was bad in this series. His scoreline doesn't necessarily indicate that. Certainly the worst of the two top laners, but, the solo laners need to step up. I think Milky Way's starting to do his job. He's very good on these facilitators, has very good early pathing, and Dectum's been relatively good for this team too. Life had a good series, and so they were able to win. But if you're not going to get that out of Life every single series, which I think is, at the moment, at least a relatively realistic possibility, then I need to see more out of the middle of this map. And right now, it just feels like it's there. Still, a nice win for FPX. You would have liked if they would have done it in a 2-0, considering how bad EDG is at this point, but at least they were able to pick up the series win. But for EDG on the other side, again, everything is just going wrong. There's really not a lot else to say about it. Ale was back in here in the top lane. Obviously, Solo Kill had been playing a bit in the top lane here. There have been some off-the-riff things going on with Ale. His work ethic and his commitment to this team have certainly been questioned, but what you can't question is that him coming back in here made it very apparent that he is the best player on this team, even with JJ here, who is just not playing well at all. Ale is like the focal point for everything that this team wants to do. He came in and destroyed Zhao Lahu in the top lane matchup and won game 2, made games 1 and 3 relatively interesting, but outside of that, it's just hard to win when you have a bot lane that is this bad right now. Vampire, we've talked about at length, being right up there for the worst players in the LPL right now. Certainly has not transitioned to the LPL well. He has been very lackluster. I mean, I had him as my last ranked support going into the year, and even I'm frustrated with how not good he has been at the start of this split, but they can't figure out anything at AD carry either. Obviously, Leave didn't feel like the answer. His, synergy or lack thereof with teammates on this team is well documented, but the Snake hasn't exactly been good either. He's going to get done to the series here. It just doesn't feel like they have any answer in the bot lane, even with players like Fisher getting better every single series, which I do think is the case. Fisher was abysmal in week number 1, and he looked really bad at the beginning of week 2, but the final series of week 2, this series here in week 3, there are positives to take away from this. He is having more good games now than he did earlier on in the year. If he keep that development going, maybe the prospect that everybody was hyping up so much could eventually get into a spot where he could be like a competent starting LPL mid laner. That's, I hate to say it, it's kind of the Tong Yuan arc for RNG, where he was just atrocious when he first came in, eventually started to figure some stuff out. Maybe Fisher can be Tong Yuan, but right now it's still up in the air for that, but this bot lane's just never going to get better. Like, they're really, really genuinely bad, and I don't really see a world in which that changes. EDG is a bottom 2 team at best right now in the LPL. They are winless, and it's for a reason. This is not a good League of Legends team, and I don't really think that there's a lot of signs that it's going to turn around. Maybe Ale and JJ get it together. Maybe Fisher continues to grow, but I think the upside of this team is like a competitive non-playoff team, and for EDG, that's a disaster. But for FPX, this is a nice win. Again, the bottom of the LPL playoffs are pretty wide open right now. There's nothing to say that this FPX team isn't talented enough to be able to sneak their way in there. I still have them in the race at number 13 at the moment, and we'll talk about it. Not all of those 10 spots are locked in by any means, and so this was a pretty big win for them. It was nice to see Life in particular stepping up, but again, if you can get those solo laners locked in to play in the same way that, Jungle and AD Carry have been over the start of this split, I think FPX is actually a team to keep an eye on. And then moving on to our second series of day number 2, and a couple of really good teams going head-to-head here, and we get our first 2-game series of the week. It's LGD Esports taking on Bilibili Gaming, and like I said, it was 2 games, and it was Bilibili winning again. They are 10-1 in game score to start off 2024, 5-0 start for Bilibili. They have lived up to expectations so far. I claimed that they were going to be the best team in the LPL. In fact, in my primer, if you had watched it, I claimed that they were going to be the best team in the world in 2024. So far, so good. I'm not going to say that they've lived up to best team in the world, because man, there's a lot that can, go differently at events. T1 and Gen G still look very good. LGD Gaming look very good here, but Bilibili have done everything they need to do at the beginning of the year to show that the hype around them was absolutely real, that getting Knight in the mid lane was a huge benefit, and that all of the negatives that people threw at him as a selfish player and somebody who doesn't win in big moments, It's just not true. 2 games of Karma here, and they both looked fantastic. He ceded a lot of the pressure to On, his support, and he's been doing it to his jungle the entire split. Very good stuff from Bilibili. And then for LNG on the other side, as much as I want to sit here and be like, oh, and now they're under 500 and they're 2-3 and that record looks bad, the context of those losses I think matters a lot. Their schedule has been absolutely brutal. I mean, they've had the hardest schedule in the LPL to start the year. It's really not looked good, and while some of these players aren't looking like the way that they did in 2023, that can't be denied, and there are problems with this team like I talked about last week. I also think there's reason to believe that it's going to get better before it gets worse, right? So we'll talk about that later, but for Bilibili, let's jump into it. Player of the series for me is going to go to On in the support position. I just had to give it to him in this one. Jun continues to be fantastic, and he is a big, front runner for MVP right now. Knight is a big front runner for MVP right now, but On is also in that conversation. He has not received a player of the series for me this year, but he's continuously talked about as a player that I think is killing it, and that's just because of how good jungle mid has been for Bilibili. I had to give him some slack here and give him this the player of the series in this series against LNG, where he was just simply better than everybody he was going up against. It's cool to see him on Nami. He definitely performs on Enchanters better than people give him credit for, but at the end of the day, it's the Rakan game that we're going to remember. It's the aggressive engages, it's moving around the map, it's being super proactive, it's playing off of the Xayah and playing off the Karma and playing off the Jax at an incredibly high level, both in the mid game and in the late game. On has really transformed himself into a super complete support. Like I said, obviously when he was coming up through the system, a player that was receiving a starting role a lot earlier than people expected him to over a player like Sword Art on Weibo Gaming, really surpassed a lot of expectations, was a bit of a scapegoat on that team for a bit, but was always a very good player, talked about very highly on this channel, and then he gets here to Bilibili Gaming, gets with another player in Elk who's very aggressive, they synergize very well, and it allows him to really blow up, but he still has those moments where it's like, it's a little too over aggressive. I think 2024 might be that turning point for him, where he goes from a top 5 support in the world that's going to have some bad games alongside his good games to a top 1 support in the world that is just very consistent from game to game. That's kind of what he's been so far this year, even on his non-super aggressive picks, which has always kind of been the concern. On has been fantastic. In my opinion, the best support in the world so far in 2024, and that is elite company with how players like Lehens and Delight and Keria are playing over in the LPL. But for the rest of this team, Jun continues to be a primary carry for them whenever he gets any sort of early game champion that he can just snowball the game out of control on. Obviously, the Lee Sin in game number 1, but we know that that's his style. He was a Nidalee one trick in solo queue before he became a pro. We know what Jun can do. I feel like his partnership with Knight is going to be looked on as something that got the most out of him as a player. As much as I like Yagao, I actually don't think Jun and Yagao were the perfect synergistic jungle mid. I think they obviously made it work and they got better as the year went on, but these two have the potential to be the best jungle mid in the world and have it not be particularly close. And I think that is the biggest endorsement that I could possibly give them. Jun has been genuinely phenomenal. He has done everything he has been asked to do, and he's made virtually no mistakes over the course of this year. This aggressive style that Knight likes to play, I think Jun is really in on, and On is really in on. And of course, Knight helps enable that, even playing things like the Karma that move around the map. I know I talk about him a lot, but that's because he really is such a primary focus of all the games that he's in because of the pressure that he generally just puts on any opposing mid, including someone like Scout, who actually played okay here and is a good player, but, Knight's really good, man. He just beats everybody. He attracts so much attention, and he needs so many resources in order to not be relevant in the mid lane that it opens up so many opportunities for his jungle, for his bot lane, for his top lane to be a lot more proactive, and I think it's just helped this team a lot. Ironically enough, it's Elk and Bin who are the players who are the least talked about. Elk has still been very good this year. Bin has certainly had his struggles, but the reason I'm not super concerned about that is Bin is honestly, if you throw out 2023, he's a player who's kind of been known to coast in the regular season. That's not out of the realm of possibility for Bin. That's kind of what he did in 2022. It's kind of what he did in 2021, and so I'm really not all that concerned. I think Bin will step up and be this hyper carry when it matters the most, but Jun and Knight and On in particular have really kind of risen to become all 3 maybe top 5 players in the world right now, and it shouldn't be that surprising, but it's really good to see. And then for LNG on the other side, I went on this big tangent last week. I did some analysis in their LGD Gaming series, and you can go ahead and check that out. Obviously, the video is going to be linked. You can go ahead and check that out if you're interested, but essentially boiling it down, the change of play style, I think, has hurt LNG in the short term because a lot of their players don't necessarily fit into the style that I think they're pushing for. I think a lot of LNG management, maybe coaching staff, saw that a lot of the best teams in the world last year, very aggressive, trying to push the tempo, wanting to take these 60-40, 65-35 plays that maybe wouldn't work as well for LNG. They took a lot of 80-20s, and that's because they were able to create a lot more 80s than other teams, and it worked for them. It got them to the finals, but they couldn't get it done at Worlds. They got beat by a T1 team that was more aggro, so they went and got more aggro players. They got Weibo in the jungle, who's significantly more aggro than Tarzan. They got Mark in the support position, who's significantly more aggro than Hong as a player, and I think it's hurt players like Scout and Gala, who are actually better in these slower paced systems, and we're seeing that Weibo is pushing the tempo a lot in these games, and the team is just not following up. He's going to get done of the series here. I don't even necessarily think that the plays that he's going for are miserably bad. I think in certain circumstances they could work, but it does not feel like this team is on the same page. Now, how much of that is them going up against Bilibili and LGD Gaming and all of these teams so early on in the split? I don't know, because these are all really good teams, and it's hard to get a good idea of whether or not this is going to happen against them because they are underdogs in these games, but you want to see this team click a bit more, and it's just not happened. There are some bright sides. I think Gala's mechanics are still very much there. He's an incredibly consistent carry in the mid game. He's really good at fighting. If the rest of the team around him can be good, I think that's a positive. Scout has gotten better over the last couple of series. Really did not look good at the start of the split, but is looking all right now. And Zika looks fine on the top side. He was the better top laner in this series, but their new additions, Weibo and Mark, are not clicking right now. Mark, I don't think has been a disaster, but he's really not been good for this team, and Weibo, I think, while he's had good moments, has had more bad than good moments, and I think a lot of us who knew Weibo could have expected that. He's a player that when he wins big, and when he loses big, and that's just kind of who he is, and that's what we're seeing here on LNG. I'm not doomer about LNG. I still think they're a top 5 team in the LPL, even with their below 500 record, but I think that might be the ceiling for them this year if things do not get better. This is a team that expects to go to Worlds. They made the finals of the LPL last year, and it feels like they got significantly worse after the offseason. I'm not really sure what you do from here, but right now it's just not clicking for them in the way that it did in 2023. And then for Bilibili, like I said, this might be the best team in the world right now, basically the opposite conversation. Their ceiling is limitless. It's infinite. We're really just waiting to see what happens between them and LGD Gaming at this point. They are the two teams that are the most interesting in the LPL with June and Knight and On. There's really no reason to believe that they couldn't be able to take care of a team like that handily. And I'm not even low on JDG. That's just how highly I feel about BLG right now. And then moving on now to day 3, the final day here that we have to talk about in the LPL. A short video, but we kicked day 3 off with a bit of an upset as Invictus Gaming took on Royal Never Give Up. And Invictus picked up the 2-1 series win. I say a bit of an upset, but is it really at this point? RNG has underperformed a lot for a lot of people at the beginning of the year. I certainly had my doubts about this team, but even I believed in, Breathe and Ming. I thought those players would at the very least be strong, and Breathe's had a good year. I'm certainly not trying to take anything away from Breathe, but I definitely had concerns about the middle of this map. I got a lot of pushback in my videos about how low I ranked the carry duo of Tongyuan and LWX, both of them coming in, I think, bottom 5 in their role at the beginning of the split. Certainly don't feel bad about that now. Tongyuan's shown some good things. He had a good series here, but we'll get to that. And Invictus, I was just wrong on. I thought we had seen kind of the development pattern of what these 5 would look like together. I thought with, You Should Know Me, On and Wink all returning from spring of last year, and Tianjin and Kren returning, of course, from summer, I thought that the downward trajectory that they showed in 2023 was going to be indicative of the fact that they probably weren't a playoff team going into 2024, but lo and behold, familiarity with other players on the team is actually pretty major in terms of being able to jump out to a fast start. Are they going to be able to keep this up? You sure hope so. They look very good right now. There is reason to believe that potentially, you kept 5 players together, you look a lot better at the start of the split. Are you going to look like that when everybody now has, time to learn and play together? We'll see, but right now it's definitely working. Player of the series is going to go to You Should Know Me. It's really funny because obviously he had some phenomenal early weeks before the Chinese New Year last year as well, and he's doing that again. He was really good in week 2, and he was really good in this series here in week 3, but it's so different. It's like the exact opposite kind of breakout, and honestly, this one feels significantly more sustainable, and I think that's also why it's going a bit more under the radar in terms of the community. I think last year, obviously, there was so much hype around these crazy aggressive plays that he was making, invading enemy junglers and killing them 1v1 and, you know, proxy farming his enemies' waves and just completely taking them out of the game without really being punished and split pushing and backdooring to win games. Like, he was creating so much buzz on these exciting plays last year, but those weren't particularly replicable once teams started to figure out how to play against him. I think the reason I'm so excited about the tape we're seeing from You Should Know Me at the beginning of this year is because this is structure. Like, this is top lane. This is just winning isolated 1v1 matchups on Cassante and on Jax and not doing anything crazy, just being very good in lane, being able to generate small leads against a good player and breathe, and then being phenomenal in teamfights, being incredibly influential in the 5v5 sections of the game. This is what it takes to be one of the best top laners in the world. Like, obviously, being able to do the other things is massive, and he's still very good on carries, like he showed in game number 2 here on the Jax, but he is so much better as a weak side player, and he's so much better at playing within the structure of a whole team, rather than making the structure of a whole team about himself like he was last year, and I just think that that is an incredibly encouraging thing to see. You Should Know Me's on a very good trajectory, and this series was big for him. Cryan's obviously been major for this team. I've talked about it in every series that they've played. He is the focal point for how they want to play the game. Whether or not he is the one who's getting the most resources, he is the one dictating where those resources end up going, and his team fighting has really pushed them forward. Nothing changed here. Their early games are still a little bit questionable as a team, but their late game team fighting is just phenomenal. They capitalize on mistakes a lot better than other LPL teams, and I think that makes them strong. On and Wink look great right now. They looked great last spring as well. Hopefully it's not a spring curse where they look really good in the spring and then, you know, go back down in the summer again. But it's really nice to see these two, who really took a major step up last year, continue almost that step up over the course of spring. They've been very good here. Tianjin's even showing some development. I still don't think he's a star in the jungle, but he was better last week, and even if he wasn't perfect in terms of the engages he was offering this week, he still does offer just general flexibility because he's forcing Rengar bans every game. Like, as much as I, you know, want to take away, like, these bad players' comfort picks, is that really worth it against a team like Invictus at this point? I don't know. It's crazy. So everybody's kind of offering value. I don't know if it's going to be sustainable for IG, but right now it's looking good. And then for RNG on the other side, this is just not a great League of Legends team in its current iteration. I still like Breathe. I think he's playing really well, but the other 4 members of this team are wildly inconsistent. And unfortunately, I hate to say this, and a lot of my analysis at the start of the split has kind of turned out to be right. I know I get a lot of pushback in the comments, and maybe this is an aside, but I know I get a lot of pushback about potentially patting myself on the back in these regions too much. I also call out my flaws. I definitely do. When I get something just wrong, I'm more than happy to admit it. The thing about the LPL is that I just get more right in the LPL than I do wrong. I don't do that for every region. Talk to LEC fans, right? I'm used to getting things wrong in other regions, but like, I think I have a pretty good grasp of LPL players and of what styles kind of work in the LPL, and so when I got so much pushback in the offseason for saying that LWX was not going to be the addition to this team that people thought he was going to be, that his last basically year and a half on FunPlus Phoenix wasn't particularly good. He was amazing in spring of 2022 and obviously before that, but summer of 2022 onward, you just weren't getting the same player. You were getting somebody who seemed mentally checked out and not somebody that was really kind of all that mechanically into it anymore. I think I got a lot of pushback. It was one of the most popular comments on some of my preseason LPL content, but here we are. Like, LWX is just not good enough to be on a team that wants to be in the playoffs anymore. It's kind of just the case. He's done of the series here. He was a disaster. The Varus was looking bad, and that was the champion that looked okay from him, you know, earlier on in the split, but the Ezreal was miserable. I mean, he was unplayable in game 2, like truly unplayable. Ming has shockingly looked horrible. I really can't even explain to you what the problem is. Maybe it's meta. Like, truly, that's my only example, is that, like, he looked good on Leona in game number 1, and then when he had to play Ashe and Blitzcrank and some of these different kinds of picks, that's when it started to fall apart. Maybe that's it, but Ming has genuinely been bad this split. Not even just, like, not good enough. Like, we were talking about him as an A caliber player. He is a C+, a C right now in terms of what he is offering. It has been really not good. This bot lane is not clicking. They're one of the worst in the LPL, and I don't know what to do to fix it. Tong Yuan was really bad at the start of the split, had his best series of the year by far in this one, and even then, the plays that he was creating paled in comparison to what You Should Know Me or Cryan or On or Wink were doing on the other side of the map. He's just a guy. He really really is just a guy. Wei has been exactly what I've been telling you guys he has been, which is somebody who's really not been that good for RNG over the past year. We talked about Gala 1v9, and you don't 1v9 with a good jungler like Gala did last year. Wei has not been good for RNG since this rebuild started in 2023. Breathe feels like the only player on this team that is surviving, and even he wasn't the best player in his role in this series. There are real concerns with RNG, and right now, I think it's reasonable to ask whether or not this is a playoff team, whether or not they're going to make top 10. And for that to be the conversation after everybody unanimously put them in their top 5 and said, oh, it's a big 5 in the LPL at the start of the year, clearly something is going wrong. I don't know what the fix is. If Wei and LWX and Ming are going to play bad all year long, you're not going to make the playoffs. There is no saving that Tongyuan or Breathe can do to fix that problem. It's going to be elo hell for the top side, and that is it. But, you know, obviously you have to hope that Ming's going to be able to figure it out. You have to hope that when Ming gets it, Wei starts getting it. It can get back on some of those more tanky engagers that he was always better on. You're just hoping that something gets figured out here, because right now, the state that they're in, it's bad. It's not just not good enough, it's bad. Like, they are a top 13 team, maybe, in terms of the performances they put out, and that is concerning. But, again, for Invictus, you're 4-1. You're looking really good. Again, you can maybe associate or attribute a lot of that to the fact that you're retaining 5 members, and the cohesion and the synergy is already there from this team from last summer, and, you know, maybe that goes away as we go further along. We've seen this organization collapse with this group of players after a strong lead in spring last year, but right now it just looks too good to say that they're not in that conversation. We've seen so many teams that aren't top 10 material. Invictus very much looks like they are, and that's massive for a team that I don't think a lot of people predicted would be a playoff team here in spring. And that's going to bring us to our 6th and final series of the week here in the LPL. A weird statement nonetheless, but a very good series to end off the week. It was Weibo Gaming taking on Top Esports. And TES is going to pick up the 2-0 series win here. They're going to move to 3-1 at the start of this split. Weibo will drop to 3-2, but again, this isn't a particularly big upset. Weibo is a good team, one that I actually have a decent amount of confidence in, but they're not world beaters. This is not a team that I would ever expect to repeat what happened last year with them going on this miracle run into the finals of Worlds. Top Esports is one of those teams that I think is at the very least remotely in that conversation. This is a very good team. They do have flaws. This is not a perfect team by any means, but they were better in this series, and they proved that. They shouldn't have won Game 2, but they won Game 2 because they were better, and this was more Top Esports playing good than Weibo playing bad. I think that's a fair statement to make here. Player of the series is going to go to 369. They do not win Game number 2 without those Rumble ultimates. He truly was the game saver in Game number 2 here, and he has been awesome for Top Esports. I don't think there are that many people that forgot who 369 was. You see this conversation kind of started a lot where it's like, you know, people last year forgot who 369 could be. I think even just going back to 2022, we remember who 369 can be when he's on carries, when he's on Gnar, when he's on Rumble, when he's on these champions that can deal a lot of damage with a lot of resources and are team fight focused. He can win games solo. He can definitely do that. Obviously, he didn't do it a lot last year because you had 4 mega talent. You had Kanavi, Knight, Ruler, and Missing on the rest of the map. You don't need a ton of resources going into the top lane in those circumstances, but he is absolutely one of the best top laners in the world. He will continue to be one of the best top laners in the world, and it's really nice to see him do it again. His team fighting is just second to none. He really is hyper consistent. He's great at isolating a laning phase. He might not always get the biggest leads, but he never really gets deficits, and I think that that is an incredibly commendable trait. Even in more volatile matchups, he can really neutralize a lot of the damage and pressure that other top laners want to put onto him. Even other junglers want to put onto him, so that's great, and he is one of the best team fighters regardless of position in the entire world. Really nice to see him have a good game here. Jackie Love and Mako were phenomenal in this series. Mako looks great on the Ashe. This is something that he looks very comfortable on. We've seen some, you know, legendary supports not look as good in a meta that maybe has directed itself a bit more towards this style. I mean, we just talked about Ming, who is just not adapted to this meta nearly as well, but Mako looks amazing on champions like Ashe, and it's really good to see. Jackie Love was great on the Ezreal and the Sivir. Cream, the one question mark on this team is Cream. Now, Tian, people are going to talk about, but, like, he was very good, and he was very influential on the Rel in the back half of Game 2. Great pressure in Game 1 on the Poppy. Cream tried his best to make Game 2 a little bit unwinnable for Top Esports, especially in the early game on the Tristana. It ended up working out. You know, he ended up kind of bailing them out in some team fights in the back half of the game, but he is still a very raw player. This is what we talked about with Cream. The upside is absolutely there. He was my first ever channel darling for a reason, because the upside as a prospect is 1000% undeniable. His mechanical ceiling is incredibly high, but he is going to make mistakes. He's going to have moments where he's not going to be particularly consistent. Do you think you can have a mid lane laner like that and still be one of the best teams in the world? I guess we're going to find out when it comes to top esports. So far, so good. Even if Cream has not been perfect, the rest of this team is certainly good enough to make up for any sort of shortcomings that he has, getting kind of bumped up a level going to top esports here. It's going to be interesting. I still feel very good about this team. I think it's a step down from top 2, who I think just are the best teams in the LPL, but to me, they are the best of everyone else, not named Bilibili or LGD Gaming right now in the LPL. And then for Weibo, this is fine. This team is fine. Like, I don't really feel this negativity towards this team that I think other people do. I think expectations were a bit too high for them going into the season here. People forget the World Finals run last year was definitely a miracle run. Like, you can talk about how Weibo looked really good at that tournament. There is nobody who told you that Weibo was going to do that well at that tournament. Some people didn't even think they would make it out of groups. I think or a Swiss stage, I should say. I think that was a realistic possibility. They barely made it to Worlds in the first place. And so the expectations for them going into this year, where they did change the roster, they did get worse in the top lane, maybe a bit more stable if you want to consider that, because ZDZ doesn't lose as hard as the Shy does, but your upside's obviously lower, and you took a risk. You're going for someone like Xiao Hao in the jungle, and that risk has not exactly paid off to start this split. I love Xiao Hao. This is a take that maybe will age poorly. Like, I talked about the good takes. I want to talk about the bad ones as well. I was all in on Xiao Hao. I called him, somebody that was definitely going to be a top 5 jungler this year. It hasn't happened like that yet. He has really not been the guy for Weibo Gaming. Xiao Hu is really not all that consistent in laning phase, and Light and Crisp lost in this one, which is definitely kind of the break point for Weibo. Crisp is going to get dud of the series. They played 5 series this year. Crisp has gotten player of the series or dud of the series in 4 of those 5. 2 player of the series, 2 dud of the series. He's very important towards what Weibo Gaming does. I still think he's a very good player that goes underrated, but he is very aggressive, and he's going to have series like this where he plays engage, tanky supports, and the enemy plays Ashe, and he just doesn't have any pressure, and he ends up dying really early on in fights, and the CC doesn't matter. That's going to happen every once in a while, and that's what happened here. Light also played really bad in this series. This was kind of a rare, bad mechanical performance from him. I don't think that's going to last. This is a player who has been known for his consistency over the course of his career. I highly doubt that he's going to make a pattern out of playing like this, but it's worth noting that Weibo really did feel a bit outclassed, especially even towards the end of game 2. They did a good job of capitalizing on the mistakes that Cream made at the beginning of that second game, but they were completely destroyed in game 1, which wasn't close, and then they should have won game 2, and they just couldn't get the job done. This is a good team, not a great team. Now, Weibo has also defied expectations in the past. As soon as you start doubting them, that's when they start turning things around. I just don't know if this team has the same kind of spark. I would expect this team to sit around that number 6, number 5, number 7 spot in the standings. The LPL really isn't as stacked as people think it is this year. It's certainly not deep, and so I would pretty much guarantee they're going to be like a top 7 team with just how they've played so far, but I think this series does give a good insight as to what their, theoretical upside might be. And then for top esports, they're great. I mean, again, maybe they do figure things out. Maybe Cream gets better as the year goes on. Jackie and Mako look awesome as a duo. 369 looks amazing on the top side. Tion can be relatively inconsistent. He's going to have good games. He's going to have bad games, but for the most part, you're expecting to get a lot more good than bad as you typically get with players like Tion. It's all going to be up to whether Cream can limit those mistakes. I think this team could compete with the top 2 if everything went right. Right now, it does feel like they are a little bit below because of the inconsistency, but number 3 is certainly not a bad place to be in the LPL. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LPL Week 3 condensed overview and analysis video. Again, not a lot of series to cover in relative to the LPL, only 6 in this video, of course, up on the screen. You can see the standings after week number 3 and right before Lunar New Year. So this is kind of the break, the standings going into the break, which I'm very excited about. In the first column to the right, you can see my personal power rankings of those teams from number 1 to number 17. In the second column, you can see how those have changed from last week to this week. We can go over the risers and fallers, but again, really not a lot of changes. Only 6 series to go over, and so we didn't even get to see a lot of the teams in action. I'm not really making a lot of moves. The only move I'm making is moving RNG down to number 10, and that really just... it's the only thing I can do at this point. This team barely feels like a playoff team. I just don't know if I feel more confident in any of the teams below them at this point. But man, the leash is short. That I will definitely tell you. That means WE, OMG, and Invictus Gaming all move up 1. Congrats to them. WE moving up 1 I think is fine. They're around the 7th best team in the league. OMG at 8 feels disgusting because they're really not a good team at this point in time. They are an okay team that, should be able to make the playoffs at the back end, but like for them at number 8, that's crazy. Invictus at 9 still shows some restraint about whether or not this team is going to be able to continue their hot form, but really they're probably at number 8, and OMG's probably at number 9, but like the fact that these teams are even considered at number 8, like Invictus at 8, OMG at 8, Invictus has beaten nobody. Like OMG has beaten nobody, and they've lost to a lot of teams. It's very weird. It's open. It's wide open, man. The final 3 playoff spots are wide open at the current moment, and that is certainly saying something. Everything else is staying the same because I really don't think anything else was really all that surprising this week. But moving on from the power rankings to my player of the week and my dud of the week here in week number 3. Player of the week, pretty easy choice. It's going to go to Wayward, the top laner for WE. He has truly been phenomenal this split so far. I'm so happy to see all the haters kind of get proven wrong here. I'm happy to see him, a player who's just been constantly scapegoated and just, torn apart on social media, quite frankly, over the past 2 years, get an opportunity in a different situation, similar to players like Morgan, and actually become somebody that you can cheer for in a really, really meaningful way. He was amazing in WE Series this week, more than deserving a player of the week, and he's been awesome all year long. Runners-up, Life, the support for FPX, great series coming in from him. Glad to see some of the playmaking instincts come back from him. Hopefully that can maintain, and then on the support for Bilibili, who's just been tremendous all year long, but was really exceptional this series this week. Unfortunately, I do have to give a dud of the week, and it's actually going to go to the Snake. I think you could see Bertle in this spot. That was definitely somebody I considered, but I didn't want to do Wayward and Bertle just because Wayward brutalized Bertle. That felt relatively unfair, so I gave this to the Snake, who's just not good. He's just not good at this level. EDG is in a disaster state right now. The AD carry position is not working out. It's really, really bad. EDG feels like a disaster team, and this position is a big reason for that. The Snake does not feel like the answer, and he was really bad in their series this week, but I don't want to end on a down note. It's good to see Wayward doing well, life and on. Really nice to see them play well, but I would love to hear you guys' thoughts on everything down in the comment section below. Do you agree with my takes? Do you disagree? Are you excited to see what happens when we come back from Lunar New Year? Just quick update. Obviously, I don't only cover the LPL on this channel. I cover all 4 of the major regions as well as the NACL. You should subscribe, by the way. It's in the corner there. You should go ahead and hit that subscribe button because we do post about a lot of content. But for those of you who watch my other regions, no LCK video tomorrow. They have not been playing games over the past week because they are in their Lunar New Year, and so no LCK video. If for those of you who might be waiting out for it, the next video will be the LEC one on Wednesday, but that's really the only update I have. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like. It really does mean a lot. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.